Hi friends, my name is Devin Moore and welcome back to another Arts for All video. Today we're going to be adding on to our basic watercolor techniques by adding texture with household items as well as some art supplies. Alright, so for this technique, or these techniques, we're going to be texturing our watercolor. We have a few additional items today, so these we can find around our house. So I would ask an adult first before using these and for additional help because it can be a little tricky. So this is our alcohol. I have isopropyl alcohol, but you can use a different type of alcohol and we're going to do that. And then also sea salt. So really simple, we should have this in the kitchen. But first, I'm going to go ahead and demo our black glue. So we all have cards in our kit. And with our cards, it might be really nice to send this to someone we're missing. We don't know how long we're going to be staying at home, so this is a really nice way just to send someone a note saying that we care about them. So a good technique with this is make sure that that glue is at the bottom. And we're just going to open it up and very gently start swirling. And making just different abstract, or if you'd like to even create lines. And what we're going to do is be really patient here. So we want to make sure that we allow this to dry for overnight or maybe even 24 hours depending on how thick that glue is. You may get a little bit on your hand, that's okay. It's just the sign that you're an artist. So I'm going to put this aside, and I actually have a finished one here. So I've allowed that glue to dry, and I've started adding watercolor into the spots where that glue has crossed. So taking my watercolor brush once again, I'm going to go ahead and get into some cooler colors like my blues, my purple, and I'm going to just start coloring in these different spots I've created with my glue. So again, this is after that glue is dry. And you can use a technique from our first video, maybe a gradient. Or if you'd like, you can start mixing some different colors. So I'm going to mix a little blue and green. Create a Lake Michigan blue. And just like any time we use our watercolors, once we're finished, we can go ahead and just put this aside and let it dry. And the more patient we are, the better. Our watercolors can take a little time to dry. So that's our first technique. Our second technique is going to be with our little sheets of paper we have in our kit, and I'm going to take our white pastel. So this oil pastel is really nice because it creates some lines on here. It's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to press pretty firmly. So you may need some help with this too, just depending. Because this is a little tricky sometimes to get that white line down nice and strong. So we can get that down a few times. I'm just going to do a few diagonal lines. So again, I'm sorry, I know this is white on white, but it's kind of fun. When we add watercolor, that white becomes really apparent. It really shows up. So you can do lines. Maybe I'll do a nice little circle in the middle. And we'll go from there. So in the first video, I used some warmer colors, and once again I'm going to use some cooler colors now that it's feeling more like summer. So just starting to add that blue in to one of those little portions that I've created with my white pastel. And you can start to see that white pastel show up, so that little circle right in the middle. I'm going to add a little green into there. Go alongside. And even if I paint over that pastel, you'll see it just becomes almost a little water resistant. It might show up there, it might dry a little bit on that white pastel, but it's still going to create a really nice boundary for us. So this is just kind of a fun way to create a little different look on our sheep. So now I'm just going to do more green. Thinking about all those leaves outside, it's becoming so lush and beautiful. Maybe you can even paint outside today, that would be really nice. And so as you can see, that nice white line from our oil pastel is still defined. And I'm going to go ahead and put this aside and let it dry. But I have a dry version for you right here. So you can see, and actually I used white crayon in this, but we're going to be using oil pastel. But if you have white crayon at home, that might be a nice thing to play with in the future. So I drew those lines nice and hard, and then I used that to just block off my different colors. And so now that's nice and dry. It can be a bookmark, again a gift, whatever you're thinking, or you can just keep this for you. So next, we're going to play with our salt. So salt is really nice for adding a little bit of a scratchy texture. So I'm going to open up my salt here, and you can use salt like this where you pinch it out, or you can just take your salt shaker right over top. Whatever works best for you. So let's go ahead and find that purple. So again, making sure I really dip my paintbrush in there, nice with water. And when I'm using salt, just like any other time I'm using my watercolor, I want there to be a fair amount of moisture on the page, because once this starts to dry, if it's a little bit thinner, it's going to be a little harder for that salt to stick and we won't get that desired effect. So I have my purple. I'm going to add a little blue in there just to keep it interesting. But feel free to combine these techniques if you want to keep playing with that gradient or that saturation with just the one color. Whatever works for you. This is your project. This is your time just to create. So as you can see, this is really nice and wet with my water. So I'm going to go ahead, take a pinch of salt, and just start going all over my paper. You can do this really intentionally, so making sure that you keep it a design. So if I wanted to keep everything in this little diagonal, I could do that. Or if I want, I can take a pinch and put it all over the paper. So this is another moment where we're going to have to be patient. We don't want to move this too much because we have the salt on top of it. So I'm going to be really careful. Take this over here to dry, and then I want to show you how it looks once it's dry. So this is once again something I did before we shot today, but it's nice and dry, but you can see that there's still salt on top of here. So this is kind of the fun part. We can go ahead and start to take our hand over that salt. Or if you'd like to keep a little bit on just to keep that texture interesting, you're welcome to. But you can start to see that there are these little speckles here. So it just kind of amps up our watercolor a little bit. And it's just fun to try these different techniques. Who would have thought salt would make that kind of texture on our page? So lastly, we're going to be using alcohol. So this is a technique that's pretty new to me as well. I'm really glad that I've been playing around with that. I've been having a lot of fun. So we're going to take that watercolor once again. And I haven't used my brown and my black yet, so I'm going to use some of that. And black's going to be a little more intense because it's such a dark color or shade. So I'm gonna keep that a little bit closer to the bottom. And then I'm gonna mix my purple and my blue. And it will be a little trickier to blend that black with another color, so you may want to keep it a little lighter at the end. You can see it's starting to mix, but black is pretty overpowering when we're using that with paint. So it can be nice just to be a little more intentional about that. All right. So I have my quick little gradient here. I'm going to take just a little pipette or a little thing to dispense my alcohol. I'm going to put it on very gently, maybe little bits. I might be able to shake it a little bit here, but as you can see, it's starting to separate our paint a little bit and create these fun little circles. And so it's a little more saturated in the middle, and as it goes out, it gets a little calmer. It starts to lighten up. But we've even brought out a little pink over here in our purple. Our blue and purple has some really dark indigo kind of vibes at the outside, and then very gently you can see the alcohol in the black. So I do have a finished piece with that, so you can see how it dries. So I just chose to use blue here. So I took that alcohol and just played with that, and it almost kind of looks like a sky or maybe some bubbles on the water. And then lastly, I wanted to show the techniques together. So this is something I made last night. It is a nice little sunset or sunrise, depending on what you prefer. And I took my crayon or your white pastel, and I first put that down. I started to paint over, and once I painted over, I blended my colors. I added my sand or my salt at the bottom, and then I took my alcohol and I played with it on top. So you can get really creative with this. You can make sunsets, you could add little faces into your drawings, whatever you'd like to do, but it's just a nice way to mix up our usual watercolor.